It was a cold October night in Greenwich, Connecticut, and 15-year-old Martha Moxley had just vanished into the darkness. No one knew it then, but the events of that Halloween Eve in 1975 would haunt an entire community for decades and expose the dark underbelly of America's elite. Greenwich, Connecticut is a wealthy town in Fairfield County, known for its massive estates, manicured lawns, and some of the most powerful families in America. With a population of around 60,000, it was considered one of the safest and most prestigious places to live in the entire country. Among the residents was 15-year-old Martha Elizabeth Moxley, a bright, athletic, and popular girl who had recently moved there with her family from Piedmont, California. Martha was a freshman at Greenwich High School and had quickly made friends in her new neighborhood. She was outgoing, confident, and had a natural charm that drew people to her. Friends described her as funny, adventurous, and full of life. A young girl who loved playing sports, especially golf and field hockey, and who had a radiant smile that could light up any room. She was close with her older brother, John, and adored by her parents. To those who knew her, Martha was the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. She had big dreams, talked about traveling the world, and had her whole life ahead of her. Martha lived with her family at 38 Walsh Lane in the exclusive Bellhaven neighborhood, a gated community within Greenwich that was home to millionaires, business executives, and even members of America's most famous political families. Her father, David Moxley, was a successful executive at Touche Ross & Company, an international accounting firm. Her mother, Dorothy Moxley, was a devoted homemaker who poured her love and energy into raising Martha and John. The Moxleys had moved to Greenwich in 1974, hoping to give their children a better life and more opportunities. They bought a beautiful home with large windows and a spacious backyard, and they quickly became friendly with their neighbors. One of those neighbors was the Skakel family, who lived in a sprawling mansion directly across the street from the Moxleys. The Skakels were not just wealthy, they were connected to American royalty. Rushton Skakel Sr., the father, was the founder of Great Lakes Carbon Corporation, a multi-million-dollar company. His sister, Ethel Skakel, was married to Robert F. Kennedy, the former U.S. Attorney General and brother of President John F. Kennedy. The Skakel household was chaotic and unsupervised. Rushton's wife, Anne, had died of cancer in 1973, leaving him to raise 7 children largely on his own. The kids ran wild, threw parties, and had little discipline. Despite the dysfunction, the Skakel children were popular in the neighborhood, and Martha quickly became friends with them. 2 of the Skakel boys, Thomas and Michael, were particularly close to Martha. Thomas, who was 17, was tall, good-looking, and had shown a clear romantic interest in Martha. The two had been flirting for weeks, and some friends said they were on the verge of dating. Michael, who was 15, the same age as Martha, also had a crush on her. He was quieter, more troubled, and struggled with feelings of jealousy toward his older brother. Both boys vied for Martha's attention, and tension between them was growing. On the night of October 30th, 1975, the night before Halloween, Martha left her home around 6:30 p.m. She told her mother she was going out with friends and promised to be home by her strict curfew of 9:30 p.m. It was Mischief Night, a New England tradition where teenagers would play harmless pranks, throw toilet paper in trees, and roam the neighborhood having fun. Martha was excited. She wore jeans, a pink turtleneck, a blue parka jacket, and her favorite sneakers as she walked out the door. Dorothy watched her daughter leave, waving goodbye from the porch. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd ever see Martha alive. Martha's first stop that evening was the Skakel house, where several teenagers had gathered on the driveway. The group included Thomas Skakel, Michael Skakel, their older brother John, and a few other neighborhood friends. They were listening to music, joking around, and planning their evening. The Skakel tutor, Kenneth Littleton, had just started working for the family that very day. He was 23 years old, hired to help the boys with their schoolwork and keep them out of trouble. He later said he felt uneasy that night, sensing the boys were drinking and acting reckless. According to multiple witnesses, Martha spent most of the evening with Thomas. The two sat together in the Skakels' Lincoln Continental, talking, laughing, and flirting. At one point, they were seen kissing in the car. Friends said Thomas seemed possessive of Martha, and Michael appeared visibly upset, watching from a distance. Michael later admitted he felt jealous and hurt seeing his brother with the girl he liked. Around 9:15 p.m., the group began to break up. Some of the kids went inside, and others started heading home. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Martha told Thomas she needed to go home or she'd miss her curfew. Witnesses said they saw the two of them walking together toward the Moxley house. Thomas later told police that they stopped outside her driveway and fooled around for about 20 minutes. He said they kissed and touched each other, but insisted that around 9:50 p.m., Martha told him she had to go inside. He claimed he went back to his house, went upstairs, and watched a Monty Python show on TV with his brothers and the tutor. He said he never saw Martha again after that. But Martha never made it inside her house, and she was never seen alive again. Music. The next morning, Halloween, October 31st, 1975, Dorothy Moxley woke up early and immediately knew something was wrong. Martha's bed was still made. She hadn't come home. Dorothy's heart sank. She rushed downstairs and checked the entire house. No sign of Martha. She called Martha's closest friends, asking if anyone had seen her or if she had stayed over somewhere. No one knew where she was. Panic set in. Dorothy called her husband, David, who was out of town on business, and then she called the police. Greenwich police arrived around midday, but they didn't take the report seriously at first. They assumed Martha had stayed out with friends or run away. Officers told Dorothy that teenagers do this all the time and that she'd probably show up soon. But Dorothy insisted something was terribly wrong. Martha had never missed curfew. She would never make her mother worry like this. Reluctantly, police began asking around the neighborhood. Then, just before 1 p.m., tragedy struck. Sheila McGuire, a close friend of the Moxley family, was walking through the Moxley property helping with the search. As she passed under a large pine tree near the driveway, about 100 feet from the house, she noticed something unusual beneath the low-hanging branches. She moved closer and screamed. It was Martha, lying face down in the grass, partially hidden by the tree. Her body was covered in blood, and it was clear she had been dead for hours. Police were called back immediately. Detectives and forensic teams rushed to the scene. What they found was horrifying. Martha had been brutally beaten to death. Her skull was shattered from multiple blows, and her face was almost unrecognizable. There were deep gashes on her head and neck. Near her body lay a broken golf club, a Tony Penna 6-iron. The shaft had been driven through her neck with such force that it had broken off. Another piece of the club was found 80 feet away, covered in blood and hair. The handle of the club had distinctive markings, making it easy to trace. The medical examiner later determined that Martha had been struck at least 14 times in the head and face with the golf club. The attack had been frenzied, brutal, and personal. She had also been stabbed in the neck with the sharp, broken end of the club shaft. The pathologist estimated she had died between 10 p.m. and midnight. Her jeans had been pulled down, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. Investigators believe the attacker may have tried to make it look like a sexual crime, but the primary motive seemed to be rage. The discovery sent shockwaves through Greenwich. This wasn't supposed to happen in Bellhaven, one of the safest and wealthiest neighborhoods in America. Parents locked their doors. People whispered nervously, and police scrambled to find answers. Detectives immediately began interviewing everyone who had seen Martha that night. They spoke to her friends, her family, and the Skakel household. The golf club became a critical piece of evidence. Investigators traced the Tony Penna brand and discovered it was part of a matched set that had belonged to Ann Skakel, the late mother of the Skakel children. The set had been kept in the Skakel home, and now one club, the 6-iron, was missing. It was the murder weapon. This revelation turned the investigation directly toward the Skakel family. Police questioned all 7 Skakel children. The tutor Kenneth Littleton, and even Rushton Skakel Sr. Thomas Skakel became the primary suspect. He admitted to being the last known person to see Martha alive. He described their time together outside her house, saying they had kissed and touched each other, but he insisted he had gone home and never saw her again. His timeline, however, had inconsistencies. He initially told police he had gone inside at 9:30 p.m., but later changed it to 9:50 p.m. When pressed, he changed his story again, saying he wasn't sure of the exact time. Michael Skakel also gave a statement. He told police he had left the property around 9:30 p.m. with his older brother John, their cousin Jimmy Terrian, and the tutor Kenneth Littleton. He said the four of them drove around in the family car, listening to music and looking for a house to toilet paper as a mischief night prank. He claimed they drove to his cousin's house in a nearby town and stayed there until around 11:30 p.m. Then they drove back to Greenwich. Michael insisted he was nowhere near Martha when she was killed. But there were problems with Michael's alibi. Witnesses said the timeline didn't add up. The distances and times Michael described didn't match what was physically possible. And years later, people would come forward saying Michael had made strange, suspicious comments about that night, including claims that he couldn't remember what he had done because he had been drunk and high. Police also looked closely at Kenneth Littleton, the new tutor. It was his first day working for the Skakels, and he had been on the property all night. Some detectives thought it was suspicious that a murder happened on the very night a stranger arrived. They gave Littleton a polygraph test, which he failed. He was asked if he had killed Martha Moxley, and the results were inconclusive. But there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and he maintained his innocence. Still, for years, some investigators believed he might have been involved. As the investigation progressed, things became more complicated. The Skakel family hired expensive lawyers and stopped cooperating with police. Rushton Skakel Sr., protective of his children and worried about scandal, used his wealth and connections to shield his family. He refused to let his sons take additional polygraph tests. He refused to let detectives search the house thoroughly. And he used his ties to powerful people to pressure local authorities. The investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And no arrests were made. Dorothy Moxley was devastated. Her daughter had been murdered just steps from their home, and the killer was walking free. She couldn't understand why the case wasn't being solved. She felt the Skakel family's wealth and connections were protecting them. She begged police for answers, attended every hearing, and kept Martha's memory alive. But the case went cold. For 15 years, the murder of Martha Moxley remained unsolved. Dorothy never stopped fighting. She gave interviews, wrote letters, and demanded justice. The case haunted the wealthy town of Greenwich, and rumors swirled about who was responsible. Some believed it was Thomas. Others thought it was Michael. A few suspected the tutor. But without enough evidence, no arrests could be made. Then, in 1991, something changed. A former Los Angeles police detective named Mark Furman, who had gained fame during the O.J. Simpson trial, became interested in the case. He wrote a book called Murder in Greenwich, which re-examined the evidence and pointed the finger directly at Michael Skakel. The book reignited public interest and put pressure on authorities to reopen the investigation. In 1998, a one-man grand jury was convened in Connecticut to hear evidence. Investigators began looking more closely at Michael Skakel's life after the murder. They discovered that over the years, Michael had struggled with alcohol and drug addiction. He had been in and out of rehabilitation centers. And during his time in treatment, he had made several disturbing statements about Martha Moxley's murder. One key witness, Gregory Coleman, came forward and testified that in the early 1980s, he had been in a treatment center with Michael Skakel. Coleman said that one night, Michael had bragged about the murder. According to Coleman, Michael had said, "I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy." Coleman also said Michael had described climbing a tree outside Martha's window on the night she was killed, a bizarre and suspicious detail that investigators found deeply troubling. Another witness, John Higgins, testified that Michael had confessed to him during a therapy session in the 1970s. Higgins, who had been Michael's counselor at the Elon School, a controversial boarding school for troubled teens, said Michael had admitted to being involved in Martha's death, but couldn't remember the details because he had been intoxicated. Armed with this new testimony, prosecutors felt they finally had enough to move forward. On January 19, 2000, more than 24 years after Martha's murder, Michael Skakel was arrested at his home in Florida. He was 40 years old. The arrest shocked the nation. For Dorothy Moxley, it was a moment she had waited for her entire adult life. She wept when she heard the news. Finally, after all these years, someone was being held accountable. The trial began on May 7, 2002, in Norwalk, Connecticut. It was one of the most high-profile murder trials in American history. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators. Michael Skakel, now middle-aged, sat quietly at the defense table, insisting he was innocent. His famous cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., attended the trial every day to support him. The prosecution, led by State's Attorney Jonathan Benedict, laid out a powerful case. They argued that Michael Skakel had been jealous of the attention his brother Thomas was getting from Martha. They said that on the night of October 30th, 1975, Michael had been drunk and high. After seeing Thomas and Martha together, he had flown into a jealous rage. They argued that Michael had waited until Thomas went inside, then approached Martha as she walked home. He attacked her with his mother's golf club, beating her repeatedly until she was dead. Then, in a panic, he tried to hide the body under the tree and broke the golf club in the process. Prosecutors presented the testimony of Gregory Coleman, who described Michael's chilling confession at the rehab center. They also called John Higgins, the counselor from the Elon School, who testified about Michael's earlier admissions. They presented evidence that Michael had a history of violent behavior, including killing animals and acting out aggressively. They argued that Michael's inconsistent alibis and his suspicious behavior after the murder all pointed to his guilt. The defense, led by attorney Michael Sherman, fought back hard. They argued that Michael was innocent and that the state's case was built on hearsay and unreliable witnesses. They pointed out that Gregory Coleman had died in 2001, just before the trial, and couldn't be cross-examined. They argued that Coleman had been a drug addict with a criminal record and that his testimony was not credible. They also attacked the credibility of the Elon School counselor, noting that the school had been accused of using abusive tactics to get confessions from students. The defense pointed to Thomas Skakel as the more likely suspect. They argued that Thomas had been the last person seen with Martha, that he had lied repeatedly to police, and that his alibi was weak. They suggested that Thomas had killed Martha in a fit of rage after she rejected him, and that the Skakel family had protected him all these years. They also raised questions about Kenneth Littleton, the tutor, noting that he had failed a polygraph test and had been acting strangely the night of the murder. But the jury wasn't convinced by the defense. After deliberating for 4 days, on June 7, 2002, they reached a verdict. Michael Skakel was found guilty of murder. The courtroom erupted. Dorothy Moxley broke down in tears, hugging her son John. After 27 years, her daughter's killer had finally been held accountable. Michael Skakel was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He was led away in handcuffs, still insisting he was innocent. Outside the courthouse, Dorothy spoke to reporters. Her voice was shaking, but her words were strong. Martha's voice was finally heard, she said. Justice has been done. This has been the longest and hardest fight of my life, but I never gave up. I will never give up on Martha. The conviction made headlines around the world. A member of America's most famous political family had been found guilty of murder. But the legal battle was far from over. Michael Skakel's lawyers immediately filed appeals. They argued that he had not received a fair trial and that his attorney, Michael Sherman, had been ineffective. They claimed Sherman had failed to present key evidence and had not adequately defended Michael. The appeals dragged on for years. Michael remained in prison, serving his sentence. Then, in October 2013, a shocking decision came down. A Connecticut judge, Thomas Bishop, overturned Michael Skakel's conviction. The judge ruled that Michael's trial lawyer had been ineffective and that Michael had not received proper legal representation. The judge said that Sherman had failed to present an alibi witness who could have supported Michael's story. Michael Skakel was released on bail after serving 11 years in prison. Dorothy Moxley was heartbroken. She felt like justice had been stolen from her all over again. How can this be happening? She asked reporters. He was found guilty. My daughter was murdered, and now he's walking free. The state of Connecticut appealed the decision, and the case went to the Connecticut Supreme Court. In 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court reinstated Michael Skakel's conviction in a 4-3 decision. The court ruled that Michael's trial lawyer had not been ineffective and that the original conviction should stand. Dorothy was relieved. She thought the nightmare was finally over. But it wasn't. In 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court reversed itself. In a new 4-3 decision, the court vacated Michael Skakel's conviction entirely. The court ruled that the state had not presented enough evidence to prove Michael's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They said the witnesses who testified against Michael, particularly Gregory Coleman, were not credible enough to support a murder conviction. Michael Skakel was now a free man. Prosecutors had the option to retry Michael, but they faced a difficult decision. Many of the key witnesses had died, including Gregory Coleman. The evidence was 43 years old, and the legal battles had already cost millions of dollars. On October 30th, 2020, exactly 45 years after Martha's murder, the state of Connecticut announced they would not retry Michael Skakel. Chief State's Attorney Richard Colangelo said there was not enough evidence to win a conviction. Michael Skakel walked free. Martha Moxley, now in her late 80s, was devastated. She had spent nearly half a century fighting for justice for her daughter, and in the end, no one was held responsible. She told reporters, "I don't have any peace. I don't have any closure, but I will never stop believing that Michael Skakel killed my daughter. I know the truth, and God knows the truth." To this day, the murder of Martha Moxley remains officially unsolved. Michael Skakel maintains his innocence. Thomas Skakel has never been charged. Kenneth Littleton, the tutor, lives quietly and has always denied involvement. And Martha Moxley continues to honor her daughter's memory, speaking out, keeping Martha's name alive, and hoping that one day, the full truth will come to light. Martha Moxley's story is one of a bright, beautiful young life cut tragically short, of a mother's relentless and unwavering fight for justice, and of a legal system that failed to deliver it. Martha Moxley has said that every single day, she thinks about Martha. She thinks about the life her daughter should have had, the dreams she should have achieved, and the grandchildren Dorothy should have held. But most of all, she thinks about that cold October night in 1975 and the moment Martha walked out the door and never came home. If you've made it this far, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Also, add your opinion in our comments. Thank you very much.